Giving back and leaving a place better than you found it, that is what game keeping is all about. As hunters and fishermen, we're rewarded in our time in nature, shining a light on fascinating aspects of wildlife, and the best management practices will help us all to be better outdoorsmen while giving back to nature and the wildlife that we love so much. Armed with a deeper understanding, we are gamekeepers.
The Gamekeepers of Mossy Oak is presented by Roxor, Mission Ready, and in association with Tractor Supply Company for life out here. One of the most miraculous things in nature is watching a whitetail deer regrow their antlers. We're talking about one of my favorite topics, the miracle of antler genesis. We learn the why, when, and how whitetail deer regrow their antlers with our friends from Mississippi State University Deer Lab, and the best practices to maximize your results in the field. This week on the Gamekeepers of Mossy Oak.
We typically want to think that a deer has antlers for defense against predators, but that's not the reason.
The most obvious reason and the best proven is for male-to-male combat.
Deer literally have antlers so that they can fight with other bucks. The buck that over his lifetime fathers more fawns, evolutionarily and genetically, he's the winner.
Antler genesis is basically, genesis is something new, so antler genesis is growing a new antler on an annual basis.
The beginning, the start, the process from the pedicle, and the entire physiological process of growing the antler, the velvet, shedding the antler, hardening the antler, that whole process is antler genesis.
It's thought that there's a spike in a hormone within the body that initiates the growth. When the antler is dropped off, basically an open wound there, it fills in with blood and then scabs over eventually, just like any wound that we get. And after a week or two, that scab will fall off. Well, underneath that scab is the beginning of the growing antler. Deer grow a new set of antlers every year, and the reason they need to do that is to invest in larger antlers as they get older. Bigger antlers are preferred by females and they improve the fighting capabilities of a male, so there's good reason to grow bigger antlers. And when they're younger, they have to emphasize growing their bodies to get big bodies, because if they don't have big enough bodies, then whatever size antlers are irrelevant, because they need that body mass to fight the other males. Body size actually makes up 50% of the who gets to do the breeding equation. It's not just antlers. Younger males, their first year, they'll grow a set of antlers, but they're always smaller and they get bigger with age, but they really take off in the third and fourth and fifth years because they've reached their full body size and they've invested in getting a big body, and then they have to spend more energy and more protein and more nutrient subsequent years to grow bigger and bigger antlers.
19 and 6.
As a wildlife manager, we invest in this long-term process. The quality of the habitat associated with the doe when she was bred and when she's growing that fawn, and the condition of the habitat when that fawn is born, part of that process. And it predisposes a buck fawn to better antler size or smaller antler size based on the quality of the habitat that the doe when she's being bred.
It's age, it's nutrition, and it's genetics. Always has been and always will be. Age is really, really important. Everybody knows that a yearling buck is not going to have the same size antlers as when he's at maturity. So as a buck grows and grows, gets bigger and bigger, the antlers correspondingly are going to get bigger with him. Now, what affects that is also nutrition and genetics. Every buck has a blueprint that represents potential. The blueprint for how big those antlers can be at maturity. Antlers will never be as big as they are genetically programmed to be unless there is that matching nutrition. That nutrition is then allocated to the growth of antler. So anytime we have an undernourished deer or an undernourished deer herd, they're never going to have the same antler size as a well-nourished with abundant nutrition. To maximize antler size, you got to have a mature buck, you got to have nutrition, and then there's not one thing you can do about this in a free-ranging herd. A buck has to have the genetics to have average size antlers or above average size antlers.
Of those three factors that affect antler size, genetic, potential, nutrition, and age, we can only manage two of those. If we can improve the habitat, plant food plots to increase the forage quality and quantity available so the deer can fulfill their genetic potential. And with increasing age, they will grow as big an antler for their age class as their genetics allow them to grow if they have adequate nutrition. If they don't have adequate nutrition, they won't grow as big an antler.
Do you have a diversity of plants growing on your property? You want to grow broad-leaved plants like forbs, and you want to have a lot of diversity of that on your property. By doing so, you have created essentially a buffet for the deer.
Stay connected with Gamekeepers on both Facebook and Instagram. Let's take a look on what we've all learned on our own farms over the years in pursuit of making our own whitetails their very best.
You're either hunting them based on their libido or their appetite. So from the bulk of the year, I'm hunting deer based on their stomach. You know, what they eat then, why they want it, the reasons they want it, the time they want it. If you know enough of that information, you can get pretty close to where they are. Tuxie's told me before, you either own the hotel or you own the restaurant. It's great if you can own both, but most people don't have the good fortune of owning both the hotel and the restaurant. So having bedding area and feeding area on one piece of property is great. But if you have choice of the two, rather own the restaurant. You know they're coming to you.
So as a gamekeeper, I want to try to overwhelm my deer herd with groceries. I'm going to plant stuff in the spring, and I'm going to plant stuff later in the summer, and I'm going to plant stuff in the fall that'll be there in the fall and the winter. I'm going to try to have so much for my deer to eat that they don't have to leave.
Antlers come from age, genetics, nutrition. Age is a given. You're going to let your bucks live to 4 or 5 years old. And there's really nothing we can do about genetics in the wild. Nutrition is the one area where you can. I mean, you can see a significant 25–30% increase in antler size by planting summer food plots.
At the end of the day, what we're really trying to accomplish when we're trying to grow deer with better and bigger antlers, higher body weight, and really overall herd health is what we're after. We're trying to get as much high protein food sources into that whitetail for as much of the year as possible.
The south, where I am, our deer are kind of stressed toward the end of the summer.
Typically it gets kind of dry, everything in the woods is kind of rank, the acorns haven't fallen yet.
So it's important to try to think ahead and have some good nutrition available for your deer herd at that time.
If a whitetail can consistently consume a diet of 16% or more protein, they have a lot higher chance of hitting their genetic potential of body growth and antler growth. So everything we do food plot and habitat wise is trying to reach for that goal, is trying to feed them as much high quality food as possible.
Food plots are really popular to help boost protein levels in your deer herd. You can put a lot of protein out there in a relatively small area. It's more condensed than habitat management you may do in the woods, like burning or select cutting. In the spring, you can plant things like beans and peas, like our Biologic Spring Protein P+. It's good for the soil, it's adding nitrogen to your soil, and it is high in protein.
So spring and summer food plots are super important, not only for antler genesis, but we're also concerned about your total herd health. So you've got does that are pregnant. They're going to be lactating soon. Biologic plants are so good at extracting nutrients out of the soil. Those deer browse those leaves and absorb those minerals and that nutrition. We're just making them healthier. So the more, it's going to help with antler genesis, and it's going to help with overall herd health.
A lot of people use perennial clovers, like our non-typical clover or our Clover Plus blend. They work really well to provide a good source of protein for most of the year, so it's a great option.
Overall, clover is just a really hard to beat, high protein, high nutrient rich food source for whitetails. These clover varieties we have now can last several years so that you've consistently got a food source. A mother has a fawn, the fawn gets raised on that food plot, that fawn has her fawns in a year or so and they get raised on that food plot, and it imprints on them that this is a consistent food source I can go to all the time to get a really good meal in my belly.
Some people will put half of each plot in clover. It's also really good for turkeys because it has a lot of insects, but it does provide a good source of protein, which is very beneficial to deer antlers.
The Gamekeepers of Mossy Oak is brought to you by Mossy Oak Brand Camo, Mossy Oak Native Nurseries, Mossy Oak Properties, Mossy Oak Biologic, Furminator, B&W Trailer Hitches, Spartan Cameras, Browning Firearms, Loophole, Apex Ammunition, the Gamekeepers Magazine, and Gamekeepers Fieldwear. Hey, to take your gamekeeping to the next level with up-to-date news and tips, scan the QR code on the screen. There's not a network across the country more qualified and trusted in helping folks buy or sell land than Mossy Oak Properties. To find your favorite place, talk to the land specialist at Mossy Oak Properties or visit mossyoakproperties.com.
You're always looking to harvest a mature deer. That's kind of the deal. Doesn't necessarily mean a giant rack, but often correlates, but most of the time it's just an older deer. Often there are characteristics of the face and around the deer's head and neck. Big mature whitetail buck gets a flat brow, forehead. You can see big heavy pedicle bases. It's like bears too, you know, another thing I've heard. If a bear looks like he has short legs, he's probably a pretty big bear. And it's a lot the same for a whitetail. If he looks short-legged, it's probably gonna be a pretty mature deer.
I would say put him on a balance beam. Look at the shoulder, look at the hams. You know, if he's got smaller shoulder, bigger hams, he's a younger deer. 2, 3, maybe around 4, it's kind of balanced. You can really tell you get an older deer, getting the big bull chest, bigger neck, but he's got that skinnier back end. What's important to try to do the right thing. And don't get so upset if you make a mistake. It's all a blessing, it's all something to enjoy, so don't fret it if you killed a young deer and aged him wrong or something. As long as you're trying to do the right thing, it's all good. Herd health is everything. In fact, if you're not managing for herd health, you're really not managing. I think that's one of the reasons why you got to look at your population and try to keep your population well under the carrying capacity of your land. Giving back and leaving a place better than you found it. That's what gamekeepers do. Now let's learn more about how we manage our food plots to maximize antler genesis.
Here in the north, we plant our clovers in the springtime. We're taking advantage of the topsoil moisture from the snow melt and the spring rains. Around my home property here, just north of the Twin Cities, we're about that first week of May, but it can vary widely from the north to the south part of the state.
Here in the south, ideally, a lot of times your perennials are best planted in the late summer, early fall. The soil temperatures are still nice and warm, but the air temperatures are starting to cool down. We're starting to get weather that creates rainfall again. That's the best time to get your perennials started so that they can spend the winter growing a really deep and structured root source. And then as the soil warms back up in the spring, that clover crop can kind of just explode and really fill out nicely.
Planting clovers are easy, and it depends upon the equipment that you have. There are many acceptable ways to plant clovers. You want a well-prepared seed bed.
We want as clean and as firm and as even a seed bed as possible when you're planting something like clover, because it's a really small seed. It can get buried too deeply. We never want to till or disc seed in, because your clovers are just going to get buried too deep for germination.
Broadcast your clovers at the recommended rate, and I like to do something to make sure there's good seed to soil contact. A cultipacker would be optimum. Just make sure those seeds make good contact with the soil, and then do a rain dance or say a prayer. Fertilizer, very important for clovers. Since clovers are a legume, they affix their own nitrogen, so you typically want a fertilizer with no nitrogen, because clovers affix their own nitrogen, and in essence, if you give them nitrogen, they get lazy.
That initial spring green up is a great time to identify the weeds that you've got. So many of these weeds and grasses are a lot more easy to control when they're sprayed young. When you wait until they're later in their life cycle, they don't uptake herbicide near as well. It's a lot easier for them to kind of overtake the plot.
Closed captioning for Gamekeepers is provided by Gunner Kennels. Man's best friend deserves man's best kennel. We invite you to subscribe to the Gamekeepers magazine or pick up a copy at Bass Pro Shops, Tractor Supply, and Walmart. Hey, to take your gamekeeping to the next level with up-to-date news and tips, scan the QR code on the screen. You know, I can remember as a kid, if I saw just a decent 6-point running through the woods, my heart was up in my throat. I mean, big buck, it's, you know, buck fever.
Almost everybody that's ever hunted whitetails has had that same experience. The first one you ever saw, and then the first buck you ever saw. Everybody's had that experience. It's kind of imprinted on you at a genetic level. There's just something about a whitetail, especially a really big whitetail, that goes all the way back to like my very first experiences in the woods. And the first time I ever saw one, it was like being imprinted. You know, it's just kind of branded on my brain now.
There's something unique and fascinating about an animal that sheds their antlers every year, and then within just a few short months is able to regrow an even bigger set of antlers. That all kind of plays into the fascination of antler genesis and how unique it is in the animal kingdom.
They represent a challenge to me. Different people hunt for different reasons, some to gain food, some for camaraderie with others. I like the challenge of hunting older, more mature bucks, and big antlers come with that.
You know, antlers have always had a special place in my heart. The fact that I still have the very first shed antler I ever found, I found this in 1981, kind of speaks to how fascinated I've been with them all my life. What turned the key for me with whitetails is I was about 12 years old and I had a bird dog named Jim. And I'd trained him, and my dad and his friends would take me hunting, and I can remember Jim pointing and walking by him trying to flush some birds, and a really nice buck and a doe stood up and looked at me, raced off, bouncing, and from that point on, my mind switched from Jim and quail to whitetail deer.
Well, the most extreme thing I've ever done in the sake of trying to wrap my hands around some big antlers was probably a trip to Canada back in 2004 with hunting the country. And
well, these Canadian sunrises are absolutely incredible.
There was a 90-minute truck / four-wheeler ride to get to the stand before daylight. Then you sat on the stand all day long till it got dark. You ate a frozen Snicker bar and a frozen sandwich. Oh my goodness, I could see him coming across that cutout. I can still see those antlers as he was walking toward us. He was a great big old deer. And that was a fantastic hunt. I'll never forget that one.
I can't believe that.
There's so much energy put into understanding deer, but no matter how much we learn, so much is still a mystery. They continue to surprise us, whether it's studying and learning from a scientific standpoint or trying to figure them out to hunt them. I think that's probably one of the biggest things of all, is that they are so adaptive and smart that it's always a challenge.
I told someone the other day it's almost a chess match. And it's not a chess match that you're always trying to win, it's just a chess match that you're trying to figure out, and trying to figure out why they do what they do. And then when you figure that part of it out, you almost feel like you've won. Even if you didn't get to kill that buck, you managed him, you protected him for a certain amount of time. Maybe you brought a piece of property from not having any deer to having a really nice, sustainable population of deer that's well within its carrying capacity. That's success.
As a gamekeeper, we're concerned about that buck 12 months out of the year. All these different stages, we're trying to provide as much nutrition for him so that we can help him into that next stage. He can be ahead of the game for that next stage in life. Actually, when you think about it like that, antler genesis never stops.
You know, the more we all learn about the whitetail deer, the more amazing they become. As gamekeepers, we know that the most important thing we can do to maximize antler growth is establishing high-protein food sources, both perennials and annuals. So don't define your success by just a tape measure. It's all about improving wildlife habitat and time well spent with others.